Hi there, everybody. This is Zach. We don't do these often, but for this particular film, we felt that it would be appropriate to put a trigger warning in front of our discussion. If you are particularly sensitive to discussion around sexual harassment or sexual assault, you may want to skip this discussion. This is a pretty gnarly film, and we're not going to stray away from some of the more unpleasant topics that it deals with. And we felt that it wouldn't be fair to have that discussion without providing some kind of warning to all of you. So feel free to skip this one if you, again, feel that you would be triggered by discussion around sexual harassment and sexual assault. Next week, we will probably be discussing a much more pleasant film. And now, on to our regularly scheduled programming. The show's going to be a little different this season.
We are referring to this as game of the game. Well, the game is that there's a hat. In that hat, there are prompts. We do not know what these prompts say.
You and we both don't know what we're going to be talking about next episode. Cookie Pocket, the game of the game.
The game of the game of the game of the game of the game.
Game of the game.
Maybe that should be your punishment. Forcing this on the pod, the Phantom Menace, or something worse.
We were going to have the Phantom Menace on the podcast years ago, but you voluntarily were like, I don't want to talk about any Star Wars on the podcast anymore after Return of the Jedi.
Look what you got.
Right, yeah.
Look what you got.
Well, I wanted a long break.
Look what you
which,
got.
has been a long break.
So here's a question I wanted to open with. Because yesterday I was at work, I was pulling cameras off the shelves, I was scanning items, returning cameras, and I got a notification on my phone that Christian had liked my Letterboxd review of this film. Mm-hmm. And then I opened Letterboxd and I found that there was no like there, which means that at some point Christian liked and then unliked my review. So Christian, I wanted to open this episode by asking you, at what point during the film did you like my review? And at what point during the film did you take away that like?
I did this to Mitchell's review as well, and I liked your reviews.
Oh my God.
Maybe like 30 seconds to a minute into the film, and I unliked them when I finished the film.
God.
Okay. Well, before we get too deep in the discussion, I do want to open just with a general introduction of what we're talking about, because I think once the pistols come out, it's going to be hard to get back to the beginning of this conversation. Last time it was my turn to pull a prompt, and I pulled a Mitchell prompt from the hat, I believe, which was an R-rated 1980s anime. And I want to go through a bit of my process for this selection, because as I was doing some research, I found that anime didn't really break into the mainstream in the US until around the early 90s. So a lot of 1980s anime, specifically anime for adults, was released unrated here, or it was released direct to video, or it wasn't released until much later. And also here in the United States, it is not a legal requirement that your film be rated by the MPAA before it can be released, because the MPAA is a for-profit corporation here. Where it is legally required that your film be evaluated in some form by a rating board before it can be released is the UK. And this happens to match up with our previous episode where we talked about the video nasties, because the film we discussed today and a lot of other anime from this period went through the BBFC office where they were stamped with a rating. This film received an 18, which is generally the US equivalent of a hard R. The UK kind of has two R equivalent ratings, 15 and 18. And so I was doing my research.
So this wasn't rated R in the States?
In the States, this was released unrated, but I could not find anything from the 80s. I could not find anything from the 80s.
That was not your prompt, bro. Come on.
I told you guys this when I was doing my research. I was very open about this. I said, night of... this is the process I'm using, because it's really difficult to find something from the mid-80s that isn't like Akira, that was released and received an MPAA rating in the 80s in the United States. So, what film did I choose? I chose the film Wicked City. Now, I had heard of this film before. I had never watched it before, though. And where I had heard it from was back in middle and early high school. I was, much to my current shame, a big Channel Awesome kid. And there was a reviewer on Channel Awesome called Brandon Tenold, who reviewed lots of like B movies and cult movies. And he talked about the live action version of Wicked City. But I barely remembered that review. It was kind of at the back of my mind. I knew there were demons and like these Men in Black type characters who had to hunt them down. And I thought, that's a neat premise. And this animation looks really neat. Let's go for it. And then, well, we'll talk about that later. What did you guys think of Wicked City? Let's start with Mitchell, because I think Christian is gonna just rain fire on this.
I'm discussion. Scared. I'm a little bit worried. I'm a little bit worried that
Christian's got his hair up. He didn't come to play.
That's right. Where to start? Okay, first of all, I was fully 100% aware of the types of anime that was coming out in the 80s. I know a lot of people that have seen all sorts of anime, so I've had some secondhand knowledge and experience with that. Fully aware that there is no line. Like that's first understanding is that there's 100% no line. Like especially like if you compare it, like the breadth of like probably the top 100 watched anime films of the 80s, like in terms of like sexual, all the way from like sexual implication to like hardcore hentai pornography, this is like somewhere in the middle compared to the rest of that. No, that's not a justification, but I'm just saying I was aware of what the possibility was. I was completely taken off guard, however, in the very beginning of how crazy the first sex scene is, and there was no visual penetration, but there's just about everything else. Essentially, everything else was shown, and it wasn't cut down to like, oh well, you get the point. They had sex. It wasn't like that at all. They basically played it out like for like pretty much over a minute, which is a really long time. So that was pretty scary, and it was a Spider Woman. That's a whole other thing. But so I guess I should basically say that I had this thing. I wasn't scrambling to figure out like how to justify it or anything. I was basically taking everything at face value, and I was really immersing myself in the story. In a lot of cases, it's very easy to digest, like the premise when it's just spoken in the very beginning, and accepting that essentially there's these like two dimensions, and there's like a human dimension and there's a demon dimension, and every like hundreds of years, forget how number it was, there's this treaty agreement that keeps them from, essentially the demons killing the humans, but them attacking each other. And it sounds a little bit silly on its face, but like the level of style and I mean just the like every frame really feels beautiful, honestly. There's a lot to digest, like in terms of the environment, and even though generally things happen pretty linearly, there's not like a lot to keep track of. It's fairly straightforward. You're basically following the same characters the whole time. There's really a pretty broad number of influences. Obviously Blade Runner, obviously John Carpenter, specifically The Thing and Prince of Darkness came into my head pretty frequently. And it's like a weird, like a neo-noir sense, also with like kind of, an erotic undertone to everything.
Sometimes an overtone.
And then actual like sexual scenes. So I guess what I'll say is I like the film. I liked it. I liked the premise. I liked the characters. I really liked the animation. I liked the fight scenes. And that's probably like the bulk of the positives for me. And that really carries the film pretty far for me, and for a lot of reasons. I think, especially reading other reviews, I feel like if you actually count like the number of sexual scenes, there's maybe like 5, and 2 of them are like, one of them's like the tentacle one, which is kind of just straight up stupid, and then pretty much useless. And then obviously the gang rape one is a pretty contentious one, and they overplay that 100%. And then she's sexually assaulted Maki, the demon blackguard person who's with Taki, the human blackguard person. She gets assaulted by her ex demon boyfriend. And then obviously you have I always kept forgetting his name, but it was just funny the way they said it, and Christian said it in his review. I forget the old guy's name that's supposed to sign the treaty.
Yeah,
Giuseppe. I liked that once he revealed himself to who he actually was, he stopped being like a prude, like completely. And I was very much looking for that. I was like, is he just going to be a prude because that's who he is, or is he doing it as like kind of like an over exaggeration facade to like send home that he's just old and weak and needs help? And I'm glad that they carried that into his character, because then it felt a little bit more justified that he was like that with Maki the whole time. Yeah, and then obviously the pregnancy at the end, and we could talk about the ending probably in a separate discussion, but largely I was analyzing each scene and thinking like, okay, within the context, I mean, there's like this demonic presence, there's these demons that, you know, obviously there's kind of a general association of demonic things with sexual assault and rape and deviancy in general. And that's kind of prefaced in the very beginning of the film. So the events that actually happen, for the most part, are not really like unbelievable events. It's really just the way that they're filmed and the length that they're filmed is very, you know, offensive, and you guys said misogynistic. I agree, and just exploitive, and it feels much more like a pleasure thing and like a horniness thing than contributing to the story. But on paper, like the way it's written and the way that the plot carries out makes a lot of sense to me. And the style really kind of sets everything up really well for me. I mean, everything, I remember pretty much the entire film because of how like beautifully drawn everything is for the most part. So that's why I gave it a 3 out of 5.
I'm going to jump in here. Usually when I host an episode or when I pick the film for an episode, I like to be last in the discussion.
More cushioning.
But I feel like Christian is going to bring up a lot of points that are just going to lead us to the future of the discussion. So I want to get my opinion in here first. I'm going to echo a lot of Mitchell's points because I like this movie. I enjoyed this movie. The scenes of assault, I'm going to say the same thing, are excessive. But I will say that I felt that the film did, while they are still excessive, those scenes are somewhat justified in their presence consistently, or in like a roundabout way, in that, except for the middle scene where she's held prisoner and you get the gang rape sequence, pretty much every other sequence where Maki is assaulted or placed under capture or harassed, sex is used as like a ploy, or she seems to be on the back foot and then she comes back swinging. So we have the early scene where her ex-demon, who yells so loudly he tears a man's arm off, is assaulting her, and we think that she's down for the count, and then she uses her hair to grab him while he's weak and unsuspecting, and then Taki shoots him. There's the later scene, the tentacle scene, where she summons her sort of like demon energy to kill this parasite and her, but also to save Taki and Giuseppe. So it's not assault just portrayed for its own sake. The script does at least go to some extent to say, hey, this is happening, but, and there's some back and forth there, which I even acknowledge in my Letterboxd review. That's a low bar, but she's not a complete wet blanket. She doesn't exist entirely within the film to just be assaulted and ogled at, as some Letterboxd reviews have accused. And I think during the climax, her appear, I was basically cheering during the climax. I love the climax of this movie. I think the style of the artwork
both climaxes.
I think the style of the artwork is really slick. I love the contrasting reds and blues and the sort of really deep blacks with the sort of electric whites. Giuseppe Maillart is a very grating character, but then during the conclusion, when it's revealed that he is actually this sort of like sage, spiritual master that we were told he was the whole time, I loved it. Watching the conclusion, and Christian's going to roll his eyes at this, I thought, oh, this must be how Star Wars fans feel at the end of Attack of the Clones when Yoda fights Dooku.
Oh my God.
Because I did think it was,
oh my
it was
God.
a really cool scene, and I loved it. So there's a lot to like in this. The sexual assault is a big red flag. I don't blame anybody for not liking the movie for that reason and immediately turning it off for that reason.
Yep.
Because as Mitchell and I have both iterated at this point, it is excessive. It is probably shown in too much detail. I will say that will there be some people who watch this film and take a sick pleasure from those sequences? Yes. I feel that the point of those sequences, though, is more to be, horrible and to show the horrible things that these demons do to other people through Maki. Now, it's also a misogynistic trope to lean upon enforcing that kind of an image using a female character. Lots of directors we've discussed on the show in the past have been accused for that kind of thing to a lesser extent. Dario Argento. I don't think we've ever had a Brian De Palma film on the podcast, but he's been accused of doing the same thing. And so that's worth pointing out. But I do think those scenes are designed to and put in the film to be what word am I looking for? I don't think they're meant to be alluring. I do think they're meant to be alarming and uncomfortable and to make you cringe and feel the unpleasantness. And at least in my case, that they succeeded. So I gave this a 3 out of 5. I'm not giving it all the gold and roses in the world. And I don't know if I would recommend it to anyone because I doubt I would ever talk to them again. But I did like this movie.
Yeah.
Crazy.
I guess I should start with contextualizing my experiences with anime cinema to this point. I am very much a novice. Off the top of my head, I saw Ponyo when I was very little with the family. I might have relayed this story before on the podcast, but it was something where the reviews were good, so my parents were like, let's go see it. And all 4 of us walked out of the movie like, what the heck did we just see? That was the weirdest, incomprehensible nonsense we'd ever seen. I've seen Perfect Blue, which I think is superb and does a much better job of sort of depicting sexual violence and telling a dark story that feels a lot less exploitative and purposeful than it does here. I watched Your Name, which I thought was all right. It didn't break my heart to the extent that I wanted it to. But I do acknowledge there's some textual levels of anime that I have a harder time connecting with than I do other films. When deciding how combative I wanted to be coming into this episode, I feel like the peak combative question that I would ask would be, how would you describe this movie to your girlfriends? And how would you feel if either of them were on the episode right now? And just hearing you guys relay the events, I'm always kind of going through my head, like, am I being too hard or reflexive about this? But just hearing you guys describe the movie, I was like, oh yeah, okay, this sounds as ridiculous as it is, because it is. I don't think, and I was actually excited to watch this, and I thought the premise, like Zach said in his review, was enticing. The lore, this concept of the human world sort of existing side by side with a dark world, and there being this tenuous but lapsing contract or truce between the two of them that depends on Maillart being a signatory or whatever. that's all interesting. There's even like a political wrinkle to that, and like even a counterintelligence angle, really, if you think about it. There's a lot to that could be compelling. And aesthetically and story-wise, it feels like it's kind of Blade Runner-ish. But I just really feel like as it plays out, it is not entertaining or artful. I think I take issue with the representation that Makie gets like one cool moment for every harassing moment. I do not think that's the ratio at all. I think she maybe has like one or two cool moments in the whole movie.
Really?
One of which is predicated on the fact that she's more powerful because Taki impregnated her, which is itself another weird, tinged probably a bit by misogyny thing that is hard to just outright enjoy. And I wish I could sort of compartmentalize my disgust at the hentai moment or moments from the story moments, but I do feel like those overindulgent moments come at the expense of the story. And when we're actually developing or learning more about these two worlds, or there's the my art twist toward the end or whatever, it tends to be just the characters in a room talking to each other, and then Meyert's like, oh yeah, you guys are supposed to have a kid, and that is what will save us all. And we don't really get a sense for the I guess terrorist group. I don't remember what they were called, but there's a group of dark worlders that are working against Taki and Makie and Meyart to prevent the treaty or whatever. But I feel like the way this plays out is basically initial scene where Taki thinks he's going to get lucky after 3 months, turns into a spider. He gets with Makie, another fight scene. Makie gets assaulted by her ex-boyfriend, another fight scene. Makie gets assaulted 2 more times, a couple exposition dumps, more fighting. I just don't think the world is actually explored at all. Like this movie is populated by our 2 leads, Meyart, and a few spooks. I don't really think we learn anything about the human world or the dark world beyond the bare necessities. The animation is pretty. I think the stills look nice. I like the neon colors and such, but this is kind of apples and oranges. But I do think, in like most anime films, there are more budgetary constraints, and there isn't like the level of character animation is very workmanlike. There's not a ton of detail or movement. I mean, there are literally shots of Taki like holding up his gun where it's like that picture of him standing was used as a PowerPoint transition as opposed to actually animating him taking a step or something. I mean, I think if you put this next to some character animation from a Disney movie we've talked about, like Pinocchio, I think the characters come through in like every twiddle of their thumb in that movie, whereas these all just feel very kind of two-dimensional, for lack of a better term. They don't move in a detailed way. I watched the dub, which was a mistake. The voice actors were horrible, so I'll put that on me. But and I guess this is a 1.5. I didn't consider giving it a 1 actually, because I do feel like there's at least some level of visual knowledge and anime style. But yeah, this was brutal, man. I loathed this. I did not. I do recall, Zach, you warning us about having trouble with the prompt or maybe possibly not obeying it to the letter. But in my view, this is a flagrant disregard of the prompt. One where you viewed the prompt as inspiration rather than rule.
In what fashion? Because this film was not unrated upon its release in the United States because the MPAA rejected it for an R rating. It's because it wasn't submitted at all because there wasn't an audience for it here in the United States. It was submitted to the BBFC, who gave it an R equivalent rating.
Well, R is 17, not 18, so not quite equivalent.
Yes, okay, but the UK has a different rating beyond 18 that's equivalent to X as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
I agree that it's not. You are not as clearly in disregard as you would be had it been submitted to the MPAA and not earned an R rating. But I still think the letter of the law and the facts are that this movie is not rated R.
That ultimately, I think that's the least interesting thing to talk about in regard to this movie. They're not councilmen.
I'm gonna like triple down on Christian watching this in dub being such a huge issue, because I think I would have not liked this film if I watched it in dub. That's how big of a difference it is. I think like being able to read the subtitles and listen to the actual voice acting makes it much more believable and immersive, because I haven't listened to the dub, so I could be slightly wrong, but just based off what you're telling me, Christian, a lot of the stuff I was reading in sub would be like, wow, this would sound a lot worse if it was read like mediocre voiceover in English. Would be like, it wouldn't be as immersive. It all comes down to like the immersion for me. Like, is this a believable situation that would happen within the world in which it's contextualized? And I definitely do think so. I really, like I said, I mean, it's not complicated. Like it's not like oozing with atmosphere throughout the entire time, or necessarily going out of its way to show you the bounds of the politics and everything. But I mean, you get a lot of settings. There's a lot of venues throughout the city the whole time. I mean, there's alleyways, there's the hotel, there's his apartment, Taki's apartment. There's the church area technically isn't really in the city, but it's a whole nother venue at the very end. You have the tunnel has its own attack sequence.
I'll admit that there are big exposition dumps, but I think in terms of building out the world, there's also an awful lot of show don't tell in the consistent things that we see that these demons and the blackguards can do, the resources that they resort to, the places that they go when they're faced with a problem, and we don't necessarily get talked through all of that, but they. You know, we see they go to different like spiritual centers, the spiritual hotel, the spiritual like retreat or whatever. So they show us kind of the tiers of their defense system. And I think it's also worth pointing out this is based on a very long running manga. And I think they kind of adapted like one arc for this movie. So there's also the aspect of like, this is built on a bigger world that you don't necessarily need to be aware of to get something out of this story. But a lot of the stuff that they're kind of addressing or referring to gets talked about in more detail in whatever the original source material is. Now, I don't think that, they're nods to or references to things we maybe haven't necessarily heard about in detail. To me, that makes the world feel bigger, even if we don't necessarily get a detailed breakdown of what that might mean.
I also want to point out Taki's ability as a human, and they very clearly like lay it out. And I mean, this is like seems to be just a Japanese culture thing where it's like they have to explain like the technical scientific reason for everything. So, but I really like that they did with his pistol, because every time he shoots the pistol, he gets thrown into the back of whatever. And as we've seen, that man's got infinite muscle, so of course he can take any amount of damage shooting the pistol. But I really like the fights with him with the demons. I agree there is some reuse of animation for sure, but all the attacks that are used and the perilous situations are all extremely dynamic, 100%. Honestly, I mean, the unfortunate circumstance that there is an active gang rape going on, and that's like the form of torture they're using. At the very least, she is more powerful than him, and she's been put in a perilous situation, and he's putting himself out of the way for her to go fight demons that are very clearly more powerful than him. And obviously they get the assistance of Mayaki in the background, or Mayart, sorry. Giuseppe Mayart. Yeah. And I just like, you know, obviously the stakes of the situation are pretty bad, and like overall, like it's a very thrilling fight. And you know, and I just same thing like with the Spider Girl coming back and them nearly dying and them getting wrapped up and getting attacked and their hands, you know, his hands weakening and everything as they're getting attacked. There's just a lot of really dynamic action in this across the board. And you know, with the whole demonic energy and not knowing where that it's Giuseppe helping them, you know, despite it being a very linear plot and with all the intermediary assaults going on, to me it did not encroach on, like, I was definitely locked in on the story the whole time. Like I was the soap girl scene also we didn't mention. That one, I think it goes a little bit more into what Zach was saying about nothing about what's happening is really being endorsed. Like the plot is very clearly against what's happening to all the characters, and Giuseppe going and doing this thing off to the side obviously nearly gets him killed and they have to go save him. So it was therefore a bad thing to do. And I don't think the narrative is necessarily framed in any way to like invite more assaults to happen or anything. Or as a matter of fact, with the you know, consensual sex at the very end very much goes against the rest of the film where she's being assaulted. Now, obviously, we've already said that is a very bad stereotype to set. Obviously, like that is not a good precedent to set. That no, there's good sex, not bad. That feels uncomfortable, 100%. But in the larger context of the plot, it makes perfect sense. It's very much hinted throughout the film. It's a very well executed twist, and then obviously the ending is easily the best action in the entire film. And then Maki gets a full like attack sequence and everything. And I just found it really engaging.
This is probably somewhat paradoxically the episode on which we are most held back by the fact that we do not have a female panel member, because this film does bring up, you know, I would be intrigued to see how would a guest of ours who was a woman react to this film, and what would they have to say about these scenes? Would they be entirely in agreement with Christian that they're all, you know, no reason for them, morally degenerate, get these out of my movie? I don't know. I can't say.
I actually wouldn't go that far. I think I feel a little more specifically than just completely purposeless or morally degenerate. And I more or less sign on to what Mitchell said about them being depicted as evil. Like I of course there's not some like neon sign going rape is good during these scenes. There's still a school of thought that I don't necessarily subscribe to that says that depiction is endorsement on some level. And I think it's difficult to dismiss the fact that these things were, I think, on some level included for a certain length because certain viewers will be drawn to them perhaps for the wrong reasons. Whether it's because the filmmakers feel that way, I don't know, but I think it's there. I don't think that any scene of sexual assault is automatically degenerate and does not belong in a film for any reason.
The director did make a Batman film in 2008, by the way. I don't know if you knew that or not.
No, I did not.
Yeah, I forget what it was called, but I forgot to mention that earlier. That wasn't a swing at Christian, by the way. I just thought it was funny.
Samurai Batman ones? Okay.
No, it was like an actual. It was an actual
Kevin
Batman
Conroy.
film. It's like an underrated one. Yeah, with Kevin Conroy in it.
I was just gonna mention.
Go ahead, Zach.
I think if we're gonna bring up the depiction is endorsement criticism, which I basically never agree with. I don't think that's a valid argument. Not taking a pot shot at Christian or anything. I just think that really relies on an awful lot. That as an argument relies on an awful lot of picking and choosing. A lot of the time somebody uses that as an argument when they personally disagree with the content of a film, and they might have another film that they really like that features murder and assault in a different context. But, well, that depiction is different because I don't have a problem with that one. I think it's a very tenuous kind of pick and choose argument. I would say the one scene in this that feels like it was included to be salacious and, you know, to get most likely male viewers going is the scene where Giuseppe goes to the soap brothel. I forget what they call it in the film.
I think that was pretty clearly gross because he's a shriveled up old man.
That is a case where it feels like in this scene we're meant to feel like, oh, you know, this woman who's, you know, taking care of him. Oh, isn't this sexy? And then it's a surprise. Oh, something is happening here. But that does feel like initially we're meant to be baited and switched in the idea of like, I am aroused by this scene. But I also, that's maybe one of the few that I take exception to it being in the film at all, because based on Giuseppe's later argument where he's like, I was sent here to protect you. He's very bad at his job if he's going off to have sex at a random brothel and abandoning his charges.
Yeah.
If I want to defend him there, that has to be like the most 4D chess Yoda messing with Luke's rations type of nonsense to test them. But that's really stretching it.
So I was gonna give you the 4D chess reason right now. Obviously he's trying to get them to enjoy being together alone and be able to save him. He has the capability of getting out of that situation 100%. We've seen how freaking strong he is. He could have easily got himself out of that situation. He put himself in that perilous situation to get them to save him. I feel like that. Now, if that was explained in the film, that would make more sense. But I don't think it's outside the complete realm of possibility. I really don't think I'm jumping through that many hoops. He very clearly had this whole thing planned out.
I think if you wanted to be charitable to the film, that is an argument that doesn't require too many hoops. To me, it feels like they wanted a twist and they didn't entirely think through what that would mean to all the previous setup. I do think the progress of thinking out the plot was
probably fair.
They have to look after the sage mentor. Wouldn't it be funny if the sage mentor is so old and kooky that he's become pretty much just a total like sex pervert? Oh, but then at the end he gets to be really cool. And they didn't necessarily line up all their what do you line up? Dominoes? Pieces? They didn't make sure that all those plot points aligned.
Yeah. I can totally see how it's justified, but I also can see how it wouldn't be intentional. But I do. Oh man, what was I gonna say?
It does feel like to me that if that scene needed to be like my art does something silly to force them to come together, it does seem like the director was like, oh, this is another opportunity for us to animate a topless woman in a compromised situation.
So I think we've come to now. I don't think there's anything like we've said that's objective and any one of us has said like, oh, it's completely not true. I think we all agree with the way that we've described these scenes.
Yeah.
I honestly do think it comes down to subjectivity and speculation at this point. I think we're just speculating the intent without actually knowing what the real intent was. Probably we'll never really know. If I had to speculate, I would say it was probably both. I mean, I think the scenes inclusion were definitely intended to be written into the plot. I don't think they were just thrown in just because. Now, the way that the scenes are actually drawn and how long they're played out, I think was probably intentionally to get more boys to see the film or adolescents or whatever. And just I think that it can definitely be like a dual reason for that fact, because I'm not sure of like there's maybe like a sweet spot in writing, or there's certain films like there is a line that's drawn in Japan specifically, or just in the West where it's distributed in general, where it's like, okay, now it's not good. Maybe that's the X rating we were talking about for various countries. But I mean, I think in general, it really is just what your gut feeling is and how much seeing it affects you. I do think it's worth mentioning too that this is just drawings and this isn't actually happening. I think is a kind of a big deal. And I know it sounds like a really simple, obvious thing.
That is another point.
But like, but like that is something to take into account, that there is more of a fantastical element to this. There isn't really much grounded about this at all. I mean, at least you could say in the beginning, I guess it feels a little bit more like a grounded noir thriller, neo-noir thriller, but that's kind of the reason why it's kind of almost like its own genre in a way, because there's so many different horror elements mixed with kind of like this overarching political game, and there's just really a lot of like set world building elements to this that I don't think should be overlooked, and I think add a lot more value than one might perceive by seeing the guy almost get his junk chopped off by a vagina.
Yeah,
which
we didn't address
either,
that. But I will say though, you bring up a good point about this being animation though, Mitchell. It would be a whole different kettle of fish if it was an actual actress being put through these scenes and sequences on set. I was going to say something, and then I forgot what I was going to say. But Christian was also going to say something.
Zombie 2 is so much worse. Zombie 2 is so much worse.
Yeah.
I don't know if there are more graphic scenes.
Worse in quality, not sexually.
This
is worse sexually.
Nudity
100%.
of
I can agree with you on that.
actresses in Zombie 2 compared to this film, which is animated. But I've remembered it. I was going to say we're also discussing this film so far in terms of if there's some kind of singular intention that's gone into what's shown on screen here, and also within the manga that it's based on. I would be willing to I would speculate. I know we've talked about speculation in this episode, but that this kind of media in Japan, there's a certain top-down influence from the people running these studios, producers, people who produce these magazines, saying, hey, there's a certain amount of nudity that we like in these that you need to put in these in order for us to sell them. That's part of the appeal. Right. And I'm sure there's creative people coming to the table going, okay, how do I fit this quota into my story about demons and the other side and somehow make this work? There's probably a clash of perspectives here, as there is with anything. I doubt this is the singular intent of, yes, I would like to put demon assault in my movie that we've been talking about it as so far.
Zach rejects auteur theory. Bookmark it. Put it on the podcast wiki.
I'm not saying I completely reject auteur theory, but what I am saying is it's very difficult for, and pretty rare for any filmmaker to get to a point where they have a singular 100% control over what ends up in their product.
I would also, sorry, I was just going back to what was it? Depiction? Like depiction being automatically bad.
Depiction equaling endorsement on some level or not.
Yeah. I definitely think, I gotta say I'm in between. I'm not gonna lie, guys. I'm not gonna lie. I'm in between. Cause I mean, there's honestly not anything I can really think of where if it's depicted, it's a wholesale can never be depicted ever in any circumstance. I do think you're killing art by putting any amount of boundary on that. And I do think you are locking down creativity in that way. But obviously there's a lot of care and nuance that needs to go into including specific depictions. But I mentioned the animation thing because I do think that definitely lowers the bar a good bit for a number of reasons, not just because of like the actual production and what everyone's going through, and depicting it. Obviously it's more believable and much worse, in general to have real humans doing what was depicted in this movie, even if it's not simulated on set, not real. Simulated on set. I do think that I also don't think that there's like a checklist where it's like, if you don't do these things, or if you depict this, you really set the bar. Like, you really have to have a really good reason for putting it in there. I do think like you have to look at the film holistically, and what it's trying to get at. And if there's scenes in isolation that are problematic, I really don't think it's going to tear down the whole film in that way. I feel like for me, it was easy to compartmentalize, but I can understand why you wouldn't. And especially if your like inclination is to like, like, why would you put that in there versus, man, that's really horrible what's happening to her kind of thing. Then I can understand that 100%. I just don't think the film was really intending to do that. I think it genuinely was trying to show the scenes in a very negative light, and it may invite perverse people, and that certainly could have been part of the intent. And I think looking at anime at this period broadly, and looking at the advent of hentai and that kind of pornorgraphy,
I know,
I'm
just
serious.
advent of
like,
hentai
that's a very clear issue.
A funny phrase.
The
to
advent
me.
of hentai. 31 days of what's inside.
Oh, God.
So, but no, I'm not going to watch this again, because it did bother me. It very much bothered me. I'm still thinking about it, and it bothered me 100%. It was bad.
I actually didn't come into this episode wanting to spend the whole time lambasting you guys or beating the point of the porn in this is bad or whatever. I really want to be able to compartmentalize, but I think one of the reasons I can't is it's a really short film. It's only 82 minutes. Yeah. I don't say this a lot, if ever, on the podcast, but I think this might have benefited from a much longer runtime to learn anything else about the world and these characters.
Yeah.
We get pretty much the bare bones about Taki and Makie too. I feel like all we know about Makie is she says at one point that her cover in the human world is being a model, because of course. But I would have loved more scenes about this world and about the conflict, and instead we just don't have enough time, or we don't choose to spend our time. And of course it can be a result of the fact that this is a spin-off of a manga, as you guys said. But it's, even like setting aside my distaste for it, I think just purely in terms of story and exploration, there's a lot of missing promise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I kind of knew going into this that we were going to spend pretty much this whole discussion talking about the sexual content, because it's the elephant in the room. I think even based on seeing other reviews and other people talk about it since watching the film, it's what people talk about when they talk about Wicked City. And if somebody was to talk about everything other than those scenes, they'd very clearly be skirting around something. So I was expecting that. I will say I thought this was a perfect length. It's short. It's okay. I guess it's not that sweet, but it's, it gets in, gets out, tells its story, doesn't linger. And I realized afterward that's a double entendre. I
was thinking about that.
Point is, I did not have issues with the length at all. I thought that the characters were fairly simplistic, but there was at least some allusion to their inner lives and their lives outside of this story. And for me, that was totally fine. To me, it reminds me of watching like an old adventure serial or reading an old adventure comic or something. You're plopped into the middle of this story with these pre-established characters. They go on their adventure, and then at the end, there's space for more adventures afterward. I don't think they ever made another Wicked City movie. I think this was it. But for me, this other than the Hong Kong adaptation, the live action version, but for me, this was a perfectly fine length. I watched this on a Wednesday night, and I had, was not up super late with it. It was a-okay with me that it was 82 minutes.
Should it have been longer?
Yeah,
Mitchell?
A little bit longer. No, No, I think it should have been the same length. I just think I have to agree with Christian. There is some. I don't look at the ratio and use that necessarily as like an objective marker, because there's so much nuance that goes into each individual scene. Even in the very sexual scenes, I think. I just think that if they really just cut down on the length of them, and you know, the moans and groans and how much they were depicting, I think that probably would have been enough for me at the end of it. I did want to mention there was a big, so I think in a lot of ways this story would I mean, obviously a manga would basically be a graphic novel in this case, but in the Walking Dead comics, there was a lot of issues with the governor and Michonne, and what's depicted in there. And the length of things that you can depict on pieces of paper is infinite. Infinite things can be depicted. That man gets all sorts of parts of him nailed and gouged out and cut off after doing multiple things to Michonne tied up in a room. And the way that it's drawn in the book or the comics, and the way that it's like, I don't know, the way that it's depicted, I mean, it doesn't draw it out as much. It's very much intentionally put in there to really make you freaking hate the governor to like the highest extent. And it's mostly by implication. They don't really depict anything, but there's a lot of like dialogue that goes into it, and you can see what there's the character bubbles say a lot, you know, so there's a lot of things happening that just make you really seethe and hate the character. And Robert Kirkman got a lot of backlash for ever including that. And in the show, obviously on AMC, ain't going to show any of that crap. But they do show the chains in the show. So they imply that that's what his intent is in the show. So there's a lot of really good ways of going around this and depict, if you want to include something as horrid and like obviously like a fate arguably worse than death, being gang raped, like that can 100% be included in your art if you have a lot of care into what happens to the characters and what is depicted. And I think this film definitely missed the mark by a good margin in that front, and we 100% agree on that. But overall, I really like the action. I really like the animation. I thought the little quips and stuff they had were really cool. I felt like there is a mystery element to them that was really interesting. And overall, I mean, I think if you read the premise and maybe even read like spoiler-free reviews or something, might give you a better idea of or just, you know, listen to us spoil the whole thing. I don't know. You'll have a fairly good idea if it's something that would interest you. But yeah, I can't think of too many people I'd recommend it to. Destiny would not like it, but I do think that she would see the artistic value in it 100%. I think she would just make fun of me because like, oh, so you like boobs now, don't you? but other than that, and all the other things that happen, but I think in reality, like there is artistic value here. But at the end of the day, I think we can agree most females will be uncomfortable enough to not want to see this. I think is a fair assumption, a fair, possibly sexist assumption to make would be that I think it's just not good. I don't think it's good for
I think that's fair.
I'm gonna wager.
I don't think we ever watched a movie less for Nana than Wicked City. And we've had some doozies on the show. And I will agree that though I think the scenes of assault in this are intended to be horrible and are intended to be an affront, the film I think certainly does not address them with the severity that the topic deserves. It is a little slapdash and excessive. If I may just speak in defense of the animation for a moment, because going back to a couple discussion points ago before we got back into discussing the assault scenes, where Christian was discussing how there's some scenes where it feels like the characters aren't moving at all. And I think that's an interesting point on sort of differences in the philosophy of how animation should function in Japan. I feel like a lot of anime comes from this perspective that an anime is a manga brought to life. And so the way that it does that is often with these very still, solid poses, and the background is moving around them. I think a good example of that is there's a scene in the middle of the movie where the characters are driving on the highway and their car is essentially totally still in the image, but the roadway is moving around them, and it creates this illusion of movement. And I know that Batman the Animated Series borrowed a couple of similar techniques from Japanese animation. And so I found that interesting to look at, and I think it's a different way to attack that kind of concept of a dynamic image. And I do think that the fight scenes get a lot more fluid. Characters are moving around left and right, I think, in the fight scenes, or at least we get the impression that they're moving more. But that was something I wanted to address before we kind of wrap up, because it feels like we're headed in that direction.
Yeah.
Demonic Temptress is a Suspiria reference.
Okay.
And it was called
Soapland. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you,
You're
Mitchell.
welcome.
Yeah, whatever. It wasn't good.
Okay.
Sorry. I do think I think our focus on the sexual content is both a product of it being the elephant in the room and sort of the most like, oh boy, what did we make of that thing? But I also genuinely believe there's just not that much else to talk about. I don't think the story is as complex as it promised to be. And yeah, man, on to the next one.
Sure, yeah. I mean, even though Mitchell and I are the ones defending the film to some extent, because
we're super sexist.
I don't think that's what's being stated
in case you didn't
here.
know.
But I think we're de facto put in the position of
At least Mitchell's honest about it. Zach's all like, "No, guys, I'm Zach."
I think that we are kind of inevitably put in that position, Mitchell and I, because Christian was the one who really disliked it. But the two guys who liked the movie only gave it a 3. So, take from that what you will. I think that there are people who really enjoy the animation and the artwork here, but I don't think anybody on earth would blame you for skipping this one if you felt that it was not going to be to your liking. Shall we move on to the week in review and wash this scum out of our eyes?
Yes.
I'm not going first. I went first last.
I guess I'll jump in first then, because I have been visiting with our dear old friend, kind of our oldest friend on the podcast, who we recently revisited, Peter Medak, director of The Changeling.
Oh.
I talked last episode about how I have this weird soft spot for Peter Medak, maybe because he was the first director we ever talked about on the show in a regularly formatted episode. But I decided after watching The Changeling all those years ago, I wanted to see the rest of his filmography. And so I've been visiting his movies now and again over the years, seeing one here, one there. And a lot of them were fairly poor or mediocre or middling or just fine. The Changeling was at the top of my ranking for a long time. But last night, I finally watched a Peter Medak movie that I can say I completely enjoyed without reservation. That is the 1993 film Romeo is Bleeding. This is a neo-noir starring Gary Oldman as a bad cop. He works in New York City, I think, although now that I think about it, they don't actually specifically nail down a city. But this, from the get-go, nails the vibe of your classic film noir. The first scene, Gary Oldman's in a diner behind the counter, and you get his very kind of husky voiceover. Let me tell you about a guy who comes in here every 6 months. May 1st, December 1st. And that voiceover continues throughout the whole thing. And we see a flashback of him as this dirty cop who works in the city. He has a wife that he clearly loves, but he cheats on her an awful lot, including with Juliette Lewis, who is his current mistress. And he also is constantly selling out the police to the mob. The mob representative in this film is played by Roy Scheider, because this film is packed with character stars. But essentially Oldman's racket is that he will spy on like safe houses where the police or the feds will hold somebody who's going to testify, and he'll call into the mob, hey, they're at this location, you can hit him at this time, and then he gets paid. And one day he's calling in to say, hey, this Russian hit woman that you're trying to get rid of, she's at this location. He gets paid. But then when the mob gets there, she's not there anymore. And the mob comes to him and says, hey, this is your fault. Now you've got to kill her. And suddenly this Russian hit woman played by Lena Olin is getting involved in Gary Oldman's life. She's messing things up. Everything has gone wrong for him at once. And he has to find some way of stringing it all together. Like I said, it starts as this perfect kind of modern update of the classic noir story. And then in the third act, it gets weird in ways that reminded me of like a Fritz Lang movie, because he directed a couple noir in the 40s and 50s as well. I really, really enjoyed this. The ending is kind of devastating, as often is the case for a great film noir, and I would really, really recommend it. It ended up being a 3 because I do think it's a little uneven, but it's by far the top of my Peter Medak ratings. The last third of it, I was shocked over and over and over again. There's a lot of really exciting twists, and I wholeheartedly recommend it. Romeo is Bleeding from 1993. Please do check it out. I don't know why this isn't talked about more. It's got Gary Oldman. It's got so many other stars packed into the cast. It feels kind of like, it feels a little Tarantino-esque, but this came out the year after Reservoir Dogs, so it's clearly not riding that post-Pulp Fiction wave. Just a really solid neo-noir.
Well, I'll lighten the mood a little bit, Zach. I'll lighten the mood a little bit. You thought you could just be sexist and get away with it, Zach? No. Zach gave Gran Torino a 4. He's racist too.
I probably wouldn't like Gran Torino as much as I did when I was 16 now.
Oh, excuse me. A change agent over here following the big crowd after 2016. I get what you're trying to get at, Zach. I get it. So Gran Torino is pretty good. It's really funny, the number of parallels of like the generic things we're talking about, like depiction being a problem immediately, and like, for example, just saying racial slurs, like how much is that justified, right? And honestly, I'm going to be very consistent with this and say it's very much contextualized in the story. Now, Gran Torino's slurs are much more justified than Wicked City's assaults. That is 100% true. There's not, I guess my biggest issue with Gran Torino, I gave it a 3.5, is Clint Eastwood does not understand the Hmong people that are depicted in the film. He also, and that is coming from the actors themselves, who were Hmong and played them in the film. I don't think Clint Eastwood knows what it's like to live in the city, or to live like black people, or to live like a white guy pretending to be black. He might know how an Italian running a barbershop is, and he might know how a Polish person that fought in Korea is, but everything else, there could be a lot more nuance. Now, obviously acknowledging that this film is like nearing 20 years old now, that is definitely an issue that comes up pretty often in films that are straight shooting popcorn films, that there's really not a lot of nuance. There's just, there's caricatures very clearly. But the message in the film is really great. And Clint Eastwood's character, Walt, actually has a very dynamic change in character throughout, and it's very easy to follow. You really do feel like you're 100% convinced, not only because Eastwood is just a great actor in general, and even up to this point, he retains a lot of his great charisma that he's always had, and his delivery of lines are very believable. He really feels like this grumpy old, oh, I just hate all Asians, I'm racist because I fought in Korea, has this M1 Garand and M1911 and everything. He has all his vet stuff still around. He just loves his dog, and he lost his wife. Very clearly a stereotype that's very common, in the US. And especially, in the kind of in the middle of nowhere Midwest, which is where this takes place, I think. Or maybe it's right outside Detroit. I think it's the suburbs of Detroit, if I remember correctly. But regardless, still, I mean, he's lived in like a mostly all white neighborhood, and now there's all these Hmong people. There's Hmong people coming, and he's not used to it. And he just has a really great change of heart, and it's very sincere. You know, it's clear who's bad and who's good. It's not complicated, and I think for a film like this, there really isn't a lot of nuance required because the film doesn't really focus too much on like the racial dynamics, and I don't really think it needs to. It really is about Walt and about his change of heart and taking care of this kid that wronged him, but forgiving him and showing him, you know, being a father to him, like the father he never had. And I think that aspect is really like perfect, honestly. It's very memorable, very funny. The casual dialogue, I know a lot of it was improvised, and it very much comes across that way. But by and large, yeah, it's really fun. He pulls out, you know, he has like the finger gun gag he uses to threaten people, and it's just it's a good time. Obviously, there's some things you have to just pretend like, okay, it's early 2000s film. There's going to be things that are like, you know, what'd you say, dog? You know, that kind of dialogue going on. And it's just, it's a little bit silly, but it doesn't hang around for that long. It does not feel overbearing whatsoever. Yeah. And I really liked it.
I need to reevaluate Gran Torino. It's been so long since I saw it, but I do remember really liking that confessional scene where he finally goes to see the priest.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I guess I'll lighten it up the most. And Zach might need to take his headphones off for this one because I will be talking about the 2026 Muppet Show. That's right.
Ah, okay.
Muppets are
I don't
back.
often have to do this, but I'm not watching this till tomorrow.
Yeah.
I'll watch it. I'll take off my
Oh my
headphones.
gosh, I'm talking to no one. Okay. This is weird. You have no idea what I'm saying right now. I could be saying literally anything. Oh my gosh, this is too much power. Okay, The Muppet Show. Sabrina Carpenter is the guest star or host in effect, and I was slightly dreading this because her music and persona is really not my thing generally, but she was fantastic, and by far the highlight of this is the interplay between her and Miss Piggy. Eric Jacobson, who is the Muppet performer heir to Frank Oz, plays Fozzie and Piggy, and he is really great in this. I found myself wondering or trying to think of any Oz Piggy moments that hit as hard as these, and I had trouble thinking of any. So that's a real accomplishment. There are little moments here and there where you feel like the magic is back. There are like a handful of good jokes. Seth Rogen's brief appearances are probably the funniest, and I admire him for restraining himself from not being like the main focus of the episode because he was the executive producer and I guess kind of made this happen. But there's just one big issue, and that's Kermit, Matt Vogel's Kermit. Kermit's voice is just too much of a departure from what Jim Henson and especially Steve Whitmire sounded like. He sounds like he's speaking an octave lower all of the time, and it's just incredibly distracting. And he's not as bad at it as he was when he first started Kermit, but it's still highly noticeable, and it's just makes the whole thing feel like a little bit off. I gave this a 3. I had fun. It had a few good moments. I think if you keep finding really great guest stars like Carpenter, who people will watch it for, that buy into the conceit, that treat the Muppets like equal performers, then you can get great moments like Carpenter and Rogen give here. But it kind of feels like the magic's running out. Also, Dave Goelz, the Muppet performer that's played Gonzo for literally forever, is now 80 years old, and you can kind of hear it when Gonzo talks. Rizzo the Rat is back in a Weekend music video, and it was nice to see Rizzo again, but he sounded strange too because this is the first time he has not been performed by Steve Whitmire. So the Muppets are in a weird transitional stage where like Pepe and Piggy and Fozzie feel about right, and a lot of the other legacy characters don't. And I want to support the Muppets, and I probably will keep supporting the Muppets. But yeah. Tentative, sad, hopeful, mixed 3 out of 5. And now I'm waving into the void.
Wow. Wow, that sounds super racist, Christian. That's so much worse. It caught me
I
off
hated
guard.
doing that with neither of you listening. It was too much freedom.
I can't wait to hear what Christian thought of The Muppet Show when I edit this episode next week.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, I believe it's
gosh.
Christian's turn to pull a prompt for our next episode.
Woo! I hope
Christian
it's
has
mine.
had a run of bad luck recently when it comes to pulling prompts.
I've had the best luck of all time. I'm
And
enjoying myself.
I think I've
so
also
much.
sort of led a charmed life when it comes to the prompt hat. So will Christian continue to be the butt of the joke?
I still have mulligans, so
That's true.
you never
will he
know.
use them?
I've
Oh,
had enough of this.
He'll be the one
BS.
that cops out first. Well.
Yeah,
alright.
I wanted to hold out, man, but it's killing me. It's killing me. Okay, here we go.
Okay.
Okay, this could be worse. A film directed by Roger Corman.
Okay.
I know that's Zach.
This
I
is
know.
the one that I was saying you'd have to really stumble into a bear trap to make this bad for you. Because there's some rough ones in there, but you'd have to really walk straight into the fire. Are you going with this prompt? This is the
Yeah,
tensest we've ever had
fine.
the end of an episode.
I had this plan where I was gonna foist something you wouldn't like on here, Zach. But
I want to point
Mitchell's
out
goading
that
me.
I have never deliberately, including with Wicked City, I have never picked a movie for this show going, Christian's going to hate this.
I believe you. But we've also done like 20 horror movies in a row, and I'm losing my goddamn mind.
That's true.
So-
Roger, now I
Zach's
will
like,
say,
oh, this will be
Roger
really
Corman
fun
did
to
not
talk
just
about.
make horror
But Christian will also hate it.
there will be some films in that stack that will not be horror. Will they be films that will interest you? Who can say? But we need a decision.
You need to ask ChatGPT right now. Which one of these is most like the Muppets?
Speak to us, Magic 8 Ball.
There's some like Poe adaptations in here. There's some there's like the OG Little Shop.
Are you checking a list?
Perhaps
This is
perhaps.
not. You
I've
have to
seen-
pick
I've seen
without
at least-
without research.
All right, I'm that is not okay. I already said I'm doing it. So
Oh, you are?
I'm
Okay, so
doing
you're
it.
not doing a mulligan.
Not this time.
Oof.
Not yet.
Okay.
There's a prompt in there that I really think Zach might not do if he pulls it.
And I might surprise
So
you.
I'm praying that Mitchell doesn't pull it, but we'll see.
Okay. Well, tune in next time to see us discuss a film directed by Roger Corman. Will Christian pick one of the really sleazy ones? Doubtful.
The game of the game of the game of the game of the game.